first, let's talk to Clifford Young. He is the U.S. Public Affairs President at Ipsos Polling. Good morning, Clifford.
It's great to be here, Tia.
Thank you so much for getting up with us on this Christmas morning. So, Ipsos recently had some polling on this topic of religion and politics. Can you tell us, how do Americans feel about the role of spirituality and religion?
That's great. And so what we brought you today is a compilation of a couple polls, and we really wanted to get at the issue of religion and division, right? The holiday season obviously is a time when we come together with family and friends. We sit at the dinner table, and we discuss and talk. Though as of lately, right, that's been difficult, right? Having those family discussions about politics, and it doesn't matter how you ask the question. It doesn't matter the poll. Political divisiveness is one of the primary concerns in America today. And our poll specifically shows that 79% of Americans are worried about that divisiveness, that division, that polarization, that tribalization. Those sorts of issues are key today. They're kind of tearing America apart. And what we want to do was, ask the fundamental question: can there be something that we can do about it? That is, as Americans. And what do we find? What do we find? And just big, broad brushstrokes, and we can riff from there, Tia. But on the one hand, Americans do believe that there's common ground. About 2/3 of Americans do believe that it's overemphasized by the media and politicians. That is, the divisions. That Americans really have a lot more in common than they don't. It's just a question of how you operationalize it, how you go about interacting with other people, right? Then the question is, okay, fine, but how? And at the highest level, our poll shows that Americans understand that other Americans are fundamentally good, that if given the chance, they will do the right thing, that they will improve things. They will improve their environs. They will improve their relationships with other people. About 2/3 of Americans think that. And about 2/3 of Americans also think that politicians have to do their obligation in kind of tamping down the rhetoric, right? Tamping down the divisiveness, because that, as we were hearing from President Biden, is poisonous. So at a very high level, a lot of faith in other Americans. Americans have a lot of faith in other Americans. They think that the political class needs to be a little bit more responsible. And lastly, and this is the big part of the poll, what is the role of religion on this? And so I would say, in two broad brushstrokes, there's two sides of the same coin. There's a kind of a double-edged sword here. On the one hand, Americans really see the role of religion and spirituality in bringing people together, in being the better self when engaging the other, when people that are different from you. That's important. But on the other hand, they're skeptical. There's a degree of skepticism about how it's deployed in politics, right? And they also are unsure about how effective it really is relative to other solutions, like bringing more voice to people. And we can go into more detail, obviously, Tia, when we look at the specifics of the poll.
Yeah, Cliff, as you mentioned, the poll is really wide-reaching, but one thing I want to bring up is it said 68% of respondents said that, 66% said politicians should put aside their differences and compromise. You mentioned that briefly. That's the second line here in this chart I'm showing. So 66% said they agreed more with the fact that politicians should put aside their differences and compromise. And then the remaining 34% said they more agreed with the statement, politicians should fight for what is right without compromise. So can you break that down a little bit? So you do have 2/3 saying politicians should do more compromising, but that still means fully 1/3 of people feel like your views should be, you should be so set in your views that you're unwilling to compromise.
Yeah, and that's I think that says it all today, right? I mean, once again, independent of the poll, if we really look at the data, there's a lot of common ground here in America. Americans have a lot in common, even though they're different, right? But it's always that minority, right? Whether on the right or the left, that kind of drives things. We understand that in primaries, they determine, for the most part, primaries, that is, the more partisans of us. And I think that's what we're seeing in this poll, that a vast majority of Americans, at least 2/3, really, can see the better half, the better self, the better nature of our angels and the other, right? But there's always that strong minority that says, well, it's not about compromise, it's about doing it our way and pushing that forward, independent of the cost of that.
And also on the poll, when you asked about being friends with someone who doesn't share your same political views, 55% of respondents said it's not that difficult. 75% of people said they can learn by talking to people with different political views. So why do so many people say that, but then it doesn't appear that it's often actually done?
Yeah, like that's the difference between theory and practice, right? In theory, we can all agree that it's better to interact with those that are different, to understand them better, to be more empathetic. But in practice, let's be serious. A lot of America today is spatially segregated, right? We live in our bubbles that are very distinct. There are blue bubbles, there are red bubbles, there are ethnic bubbles, there are racial bubbles, right? And that inhibits our interaction, our ability to understand the other. A lot of our polling, we've done this in the past, over the recent past, shows that very distinctly. A lot of the kind of the basic social science research shows that as well. So in theory, we want to get along, but in practice, we have actually a little chance to do that.
And then in the polling, where it talked about whether religion should be a big part of politics, that wasn't kind of what was polled as most effective in making spiritual values and religion bigger. They said that was less effective in reducing divisiveness as other ways. Can you talk about what did respondents say would be better solutions to reducing divisiveness in politics?
That's a great question, Tia. So on the one hand, as I was saying, a majority of Americans see spirituality and religion as having an important role in bringing us together. It varies a little bit depending on how we ask the question, but overall, we can say a majority of Americans think that. But how effective is it really? And when we kind of rank order it, that is, put it against, that is, religion against other solutions, it ranks lower. So the number one way to come together, let's say, incentivize incentivize consensus and union, is actually bringing more voice to people. How do you interpret that? Probably at the election box, making sure that people's voices are heard, in other ways as well. That overall, whether you're on the right or left, your voice is heard. That's the number one way, most effective way of bringing people together. The second most is just interacting with others that don't share your values. That's seen as extremely important. How would one do that? Well, we can see in a very simple sense, maybe in schools as an example, or maybe at the at religious houses, or that is at churches and synagogues. You can do that, and mosques. You can do that perhaps. So those are the top two ways to bring people together, at least from the perspective of Americans. That is, bring more voice to people and greater interaction. Only a plurality, about 47%, depending on how you ask the question, believe that religion or religious values, spiritual values, could do the same. It's not that it isn't a solution, it's just not the top of mind solution, the number one or two solution in Americans' mind.
And I want to shift for the last few minutes of our conversation. There was a different kind of poll, similar though, that you guys published, and it was about, the real meaning of Christmas, and there were some fun questions as well. So I want to start. It looked at about how people feel that the real meaning of Christmas is being forgotten. 42% of respondents said they strongly agree that most Americans have forgotten the real meaning of Christmas. 33% said somewhat agree, 10% somewhat disagree, and then 6% strongly agree. So again, the real meaning of Christmas, there were a lot of Americans who feel it's being lost. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that goes with the times, right? I think there's a degree of cynicism and skepticism about where we are as a nation, as a society. We see that in our politics and not in our everyday lives, right? And I think this question reflects that. The question is obviously, what do people mean by that? The real meaning of Christmas, right? And that the meaning can vary a bit. It could be as concrete as the day that Jesus was born, a very religious, important date, especially for Christians, but for all monotheistic religions, right? Or it can mean something a little bit broader, more conceptual, more existential, like think about others before you think about yourself. Whatever the specific meaning that people give, there's this sense that we're not there unified as a people. And that's how I would read it.
And that was on that chart. That was 6% were strongly disagreeing about Americans forgetting the real meaning of Christmas. That poll also asked about taking down holiday decorations. 41% said they start taking down their decorations the first weekend of January. 48% said the latest people should leave their holiday decorations is the first week of January, and 23% said people should take down their Christmas decorations by late July. I'm going to ask you, Clifford, if you have your decorations up, when do you and your family normally take them down?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, my neighbor never does. So there we go. It's year round. But in the Young household, we take them down the 1st of January.
And this is the latest. I want to end on this one. The most annoying or overplayed Christmas song. That was also part of the poll. So it first asked people if they felt that there were certain songs that were overplayed. And of those who voted and could come up with a song, Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. That 12% said that's the most annoying or overplayed Christmas song. 6% Jingle Bells, 5% Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, and 4% all Christmas songs. I just thought that was a fun way. That was a fun polling question you guys have. So what other things did you learn, just about the traditions of Christmas that you think were interesting?
Yeah, overall, I mean, we obviously, we have these ingrained behaviors where we come together every year and interact with family and friends. That's perhaps the most important thing. We asked another question on Santa Claus, and we just wanted to know how many adults still believe in Santa Claus. 21% of adults said that they still believe in Santa Claus. Now, I don't know if that's specifically Santa Claus, the physical figure, or the spirit of Christmas and the spirit of Santa Claus, but that's a big chunk of adults that I think, were waiting up last night for their presents.
Well, all right. Even the Christmas spirit lives on even in adults. Well, thank you so much, Clifford Young, Ipsos Polling. We appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
And enjoy the rest of your morning. Now we want to get to your call.